Part 3. Jason could feel the tension growing in the pit of his stomach as he and Ryan slipped through the darkened streets, their every step weighed down by the gravity of what was unfolding. The dim lights from the nearby street lamps barely illuminated the path ahead. The world felt impossibly quiet, as though the city itself were holding its breath. The air was thick with anticipation, but it also felt like a warning. Jason's mind raced. Ryan had given him the pieces of the puzzle, but now it was up to him to fit them together. But as they walked, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows seemed to stretch farther than they should have, and every rustle in the distance made his muscles tighten. "We need to move faster," Jason muttered, glancing over his shoulder as they continued down the alleyway. Ryan's eyes darted around nervously. I don't know how much longer I can keep running, Jason. They're out there. They know what I've done. They'll come for me. They'll." Jason cut him off, his voice firm, but not unkind. "We don't have a choice. You wanted to do the right thing. Now, you have to trust me. We'll make it out of this, Ryan. We'll expose them. We just need to get to the right people, get the evidence to the right people." Ryan nodded, though the fear in his eyes was palpable. He had no idea who to trust anymore, and Jason understood that. But Jason was his only chance now. There was no turning back. Jason's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out quickly, a knot forming in his stomach. The message was from Director Harris. "You're not going to believe this. There's been a raid. They're on to you. You need to get to safety. Now." Jason's pulse spiked. He could feel the walls closing in. They were no longer in control of the situation. Someone had tipped them off. They'd been compromised. "Ryan," Jason said, his voice tight with urgency, "we need to go now." Before Ryan could respond, there was a sudden sound, a car engine revving in the distance. Jason's heart raced as the sound grew louder, closer, until it was unmistakable. Tires screeched against asphalt, the headlights blinding in the distance as they cut through the alleyway. Someone was coming for them. Jason grabbed Ryan's arm, pulling him toward a nearby doorway, but they were too late. The car had already turned the corner, and it was closing in fast. The headlights illuminated the alley in harsh streaks of light. Jason's chest tightened, his instincts screaming at him to run. "Get down!" Jason hissed, shoving Ryan behind the door, just as the car came to a screeching halt. The door rattled on its hinges, and Jason could feel the vibrations in the floor beneath his feet. The vehicle came to a stop, and Jason held his breath, praying they hadn't been seen. He peeked around the corner, eyes narrowing as the car door swung open. Two men emerged from the vehicle, both dressed in dark suits, their faces hard and cold. They didn't look like police officers. They looked like enforcers. People with a purpose that had nothing to do with justice. Ryan's body tensed next to him, his breath shallow and panicked. "That's them, Jason. That's them. The ones who are behind it all. They're the ones I've been working for. I told you they'd come for me." Jason held his finger to his lips, signaling for Ryan to stay quiet. They could hear the men's voices now, low and ominous, as they moved closer. "What do we do?" Ryan whispered, his voice shaking. Jason's mind raced. There was no room for error now. The men were getting closer. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. But he also couldn't afford to run. They needed the evidence. They needed to expose them. "We stay quiet," Jason whispered. "We stay calm. I need to think." Ryan's hand gripped his wrist, his fingers digging into Jason's skin. "I can't do this, Jason. I can't keep running. I didn't sign up for this." Jason's jaw clenched as the two men neared. "I know you didn't. But we're in this together now, Ryan. And we're going to make sure that everything you did, everything they made you do, doesn't go to waste. The men were close, too close. Jason's hand hovered near his sidearm, ready to draw it if necessary. His mind flashed back to the conversation with Director Harris. Harris had warned him. They were on to him. This was no longer just about a few leaks. This was about covering up a vast, powerful operation, one that could shake the entire department to its core. Jason held his breath, every muscle tense, every nerve screaming. The men were just steps away from the doorway, their footsteps echoing in the silent alley. If they found them here, if they found Ryan, they wouldn't hesitate. "Get ready," Jason muttered. And just as the men rounded the corner, Jason's phone buzzed again. A different number this time. He glanced at it quickly. "Get to the safe house now. They know where you are. Don't trust anyone else." The message was short, to the point. Jason's heart skipped a beat. Someone had just tipped them off again. But who? Before he could even process the message, the men stopped in front of the door, their eyes scanning the area, searching for any sign of movement. It was now or never. "Ryan," Jason whispered urgently, "on 3, we make a run for it." Ryan's eyes were wide with fear, but he nodded. They didn't have a choice. The sound of the men's voices was getting louder. They were getting closer. The moment of silence stretched thin, and Jason knew that this was the point of no return. 1. Jason's hand tightened around the door handle. 2. Ryan took a deep breath, his body tensed like a coiled spring. 3. Jason threw the door open and burst into the alley, pulling Ryan with him. They sprinted down the street, their feet pounding against the pavement, adrenaline surging through their veins. Behind them, they could hear the men shouting, but Jason didn't look back. He couldn't. Not now. They ran, and they didn't stop. If you're still with us and you're feeling the tension build, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The chase is on, and the endgame is just beginning. Stay tuned for the explosive conclusion. Jason and Ryan tore through the narrow streets, their breaths ragged as they pushed their bodies harder than they ever had before. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the walls, the city's cold, unforgiving night wrapping around them like a vice. The fear was palpable, but it was more than just the fear of being caught. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear that the men chasing them weren't just looking for them, they were looking for answers. And that was something neither Jason nor Ryan could afford to give. As they rounded another corner, Jason's mind raced. They needed to get to the safe house, the one Director Harris had mentioned. He wasn't sure who he could trust anymore, hell, he wasn't even sure he could trust Harris, but right now, they had no choice. The alternative was certain death. They needed to move, and fast. There was no time to waste. "Keep running," Jason hissed, his voice strained. "Don't stop. We're almost there." Ryan, struggling to keep up, shot him a glance. "How do you know? What if it's a trap?" Jason's jaw clenched, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't afford to get bogged down by doubt. "We don't have time to think about that. We need to get to safety first, then we'll figure it out. Trust me." Ryan's eyes flashed with something between desperation and disbelief, but he nodded. "I'm trusting you, Jason. I really am. But you have no idea how deep this goes, do you?" Jason didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, he had no idea just how far this conspiracy stretched. All he knew was that Ryan had risked everything to tell him the truth, and Jason wasn't going to let that be in vain. They took another turn, and Jason spotted the darkened silhouette of a building in the distance. The safe house. He could see the faint glow of light behind the closed blinds of a window on the second floor. It was their last hope. He pushed forward, his legs burning from the exertion, but the promise of safety spurred him on. "We're almost there," Jason shouted, his voice carrying through the cold night air. But just as they reached the entrance of the building, Jason's instincts screamed at him to stop. He slammed into Ryan, pushing him backward just as a sharp, unmistakable sound split the air. The unmistakable crack of a gunshot. Ryan's eyes went wide. Shit! They found us. Jason's heart stopped, his mind racing. They had been so close. So close to safety. But the men weren't giving up that easily. We need to move. Jason shouted, grabbing Ryan by the arm and pulling him toward the back entrance of the building. They couldn't afford to go in through the front, they'd be trapped. Their only chance was to slip inside unnoticed. As they ran toward the alley at the back of the building, Jason glanced over his shoulder. 2 black SUVs were barreling down the street, tires screeching as they slid to a stop near the corner. Men in dark suits spilled out, their movements quick and calculated. Jason could see the flash of weapons in their hands. They weren't playing games anymore. They're coming for us. Ryan yelled, his voice panicked. Jason shoved open the back door with force, slamming it behind them just as the men in suits reached the alley. He didn't know how much time they had, but they couldn't waste a single second. His eyes darted around the dim hallway as he pulled Ryan inside. The safe house was supposed to be secure, but Jason wasn't so sure anymore. Everything was falling apart too fast. They sprinted through the building, the sound of their feet hitting the old wooden floors loud in the quiet, oppressive darkness. Jason tried to calm his breathing, trying to think, but the adrenaline was starting to take over. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, all racing toward one thing, survival. They turned a corner, and Jason shoved open a door that led to a small office. It was dark, but there was a faint light coming from a desk lamp. The room smelled musty, old files stacked high on the desk and scattered across the floor. It looked abandoned, but Jason didn't care. They needed a place to hide. They needed a place to think. Jason slammed the door shut behind them and locked it. He glanced around the room, trying to make sense of their options. But before he could do anything else, Ryan grabbed his arm, his voice barely more than a whisper. What if they know about this place? Ryan's voice was shaky, fear creeping into every word. What if this is just another trap? What if we're not safe here? Jason's eyes flashed with frustration, but he kept his voice steady. We don't have time to think about that right now. We need to move, Ryan. We need to get the evidence we came for. Ryan's eyes widened. You really think we can take them down? After everything they've done? How are we supposed to do that? Jason paused, his hand gripping Ryan's arm. We do it by not letting them control us anymore. They've been running this whole show, making the rules, keeping the secrets. But we're going to change that. You told me everything. Now, we just need to make sure the right people hear it. Ryan stared at him, his eyes searching Jason's face as if trying to figure out if this was all still real. He nodded slowly, a sense of resolve settling over him. You're right, Ryan said, his voice a little steadier now. But we're going to need help. We can't do this alone. Jason's mind clicked. There was one person he could still trust, one person who might be able to help them. It was a long shot, but it was their best chance. I know who we need to talk to, Jason said, his voice firm with determination. But we have to move fast. He turned toward the door, but as his hand reached for the handle, there was a loud bang, a single shot that echoed through the walls of the building. The door to the office flew open, and 2 of the men in suits stormed inside, guns raised. The intensity keeps building. If you're loving this ride, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The explosive conclusion is coming up, stay tuned for the final showdown. The world seemed to slow down for a moment as Jason's body surged with adrenaline. His instincts kicked in before his brain could process the situation. The 2 men in suits were standing in the doorway, their faces obscured by the shadows, but the gleam of their weapons was unmistakable. The barrel of the gun pointed straight at him, and Jason didn't have the luxury of second-guessing himself. In one swift movement, he shoved Ryan to the side, ducking just as the first shot rang out. The bullet whizzed past his ear, grazing the edge of his jacket as it embedded itself into the wall behind him. Ryan gasped, his face pale as he pressed himself flat against the far wall, his hands raised in the air. "Get down!" Jason barked, as he spun to the side, searching for cover. There wasn't much, only an old wooden desk piled high with papers. It would have to do. Jason dove behind it, the sound of another shot echoing in his ears as he scrambled for safety. Ryan hesitated for a moment, eyes wide with panic, but Jason's shout brought him back to reality. Ryan dove under the desk, his body slamming into the side of Jason's as he crouched low. Jason's heart was hammering in his chest, and he could feel his pulse ringing in his ears. The men were coming closer, he could hear their footsteps, deliberate and slow, as they moved deeper into the room. One of them, the taller of the two, called out, his voice cold and clinical. "Come out, Mr. Reed. You think you can run forever? You've made a mistake." Jason didn't respond. His mind was already working, trying to find the angle, trying to figure out how they could escape. They were trapped. There was no way out through the front, no way to run without exposing themselves. The men had them cornered, and Jason couldn't afford to waste time. The man's voice continued, sharp with menace. "You've got one shot, Reed. Give us the information, and we'll let you walk out of here. Otherwise, well, you know the drill." Jason's hands shook slightly as he reached into his jacket, fingers brushing the cold metal of his firearm. The officer's words from earlier echoed in his mind. "They'll come after me, Jason. They'll come after us both." Ryan had been right to be afraid. But Jason had no choice. They couldn't just give in. They couldn't let this go. Jason's hand tightened around the gun as he slowly, carefully, pulled it from his waistband. Ryan's eyes flickered to him, and Jason caught the fear in his gaze. It was hard not to feel that fear himself, but they couldn't afford to show it. "Not now. We're not giving you anything," Jason said, his voice steady. "You've taken enough already. But it ends tonight." The two men didn't react immediately. Jason could hear them whispering, likely communicating with each other in some silent code. The tension in the room was suffocating. Every passing second felt like an eternity, and Jason knew they wouldn't hesitate to fire again if they felt threatened. He had to act first. The man who had spoken earlier took a step forward, his gun raised, and in that moment, Jason made his move. With a burst of energy, he pushed the desk aside, knocking it over with a crash, and dived to the side, firing off 2 quick shots. The first one missed, the sound of it ringing through the room, but the second one connected. Jason saw the man's body jerk back as the bullet hit him in the shoulder. He fell to the ground with a grunt, his weapon slipping from his hand as he crumpled. Ryan's eyes went wide with shock, but Jason didn't have time to explain. He moved quickly, using the distraction to his advantage. The second man, his face contorted in rage, raised his gun, but Jason was already on the move. He dove behind the next available piece of cover, firing another shot. This time, the bullet hit the man square in the chest. He dropped to the floor without a sound, his weapon falling from his hand, the threat finally neutralized. Jason stood there, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his brow as he scanned the room. The silence was deafening. The two men were down, but Jason knew they wouldn't be the last. There were always more. Always someone else to fill their place. "Jason," Ryan's voice was shaky, his breath coming in short gasps. "What do we do now? What's next?" Jason's mind raced. The danger wasn't over, not by a long shot. The evidence they needed was still out there, but it was no longer just about getting the information. It was about survival. They couldn't stay here. The longer they lingered, the more they risked getting caught. Jason turned to Ryan, his eyes narrowing with resolve. We get the evidence. We finish what we started. Ryan nodded, but there was doubt in his eyes. You really think we can take them down? After all of this? Jason didn't hesitate. We have to. There's no other option. He grabbed the files from the desk, shoving them into his bag, and turned toward the door. Move quickly, he said, his voice low but urgent. We're getting out of here. And we're going to make sure this doesn't end like the last time. They stepped cautiously toward the exit, eyes darting from side to side as they checked for any sign of movement. The danger was far from over, but they couldn't afford to waste any more time. The safe house wasn't safe anymore. As Jason pushed open the back door and stepped out into the alley, he felt a fleeting sense of relief. But he knew this was just the beginning. There were still more to face, more people to expose. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Jason Reed felt like he had a chance to make it right. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a purpose, and he was going to finish what he'd started, no matter the cost. The conclusion is in sight. If you're on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The final act is coming soon, and the truth will finally come to light. Jason and Ryan moved swiftly through the back alley, the darkness swallowing them as they stayed as low to the ground as possible. Every footstep felt amplified, every sound around them potentially signaling their imminent capture. Jason's mind was still reeling from the chaos inside the safe house. 2 men down. It should have been a victory, but the reality was grim. They had barely scratched the surface of the web of corruption they were up against. They reached the street and Jason paused, scanning the area before glancing at Ryan. Stay close, Jason muttered, his voice low and urgent. We're not out of the woods yet. Ryan nodded, his face pale, but his expression hardening with determination. The raw fear had faded, replaced by a quiet resolve. They had both come too far to turn back now. Where do we go from here? Ryan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jason turned, leading him toward the corner. We need to get to Director Harris. He's the only one we can trust right now. Ryan looked hesitant for a moment. Are you sure? After everything? What if he's part of this too? What if? Ryan, Jason interrupted, his voice firm, Harris was the one who warned me. He gave me the safe house location. He's the one person in the department who hasn't turned his back on this. Ryan seemed to hesitate, doubt still flickering in his eyes, but Jason could see that the officer was beginning to trust him again. He understood what was at stake now. They didn't have time to question allegiances. They had to move forward. If you're still with us and you're feeling the tension build, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for the explosive conclusion.